The Empire of Pareena is a story to behold. But like any great story, it has an even greater beginning. A moment in history and time where the actions of a few create a lifetime for the many. Hi, my name is Heatwave, and I'll be the first to welcome you all to where it all began. There was a time in Pareena where many was ruled by a few, before the few were ruled by one. There was but none, either god or master. The War of Unification is by far the most important event to ever happen in Pareena. It was the birthplace of the Empire itself. But it was still a war of villains and champions, a war of blood and tears. It touched every corner of dragon territory on Pareena. While we remember the war for its outcome, the horror and sorrow is left to the wayside. We know Pareena today is being united, connected, and advanced in its technical details. But before the War of Unification, it was a different place. Kings and kingdoms ruled, and dragons were left by their own initiative. Before we talk about the War of Unification itself, it's valuable to first talk about how Pareena looked and felt before the war, as it can give a greater insight into how each winglet behaved leading into the conflict. A sort of who's who of each kingdom and territory, and the disposition of each winglet. Because before the Empire, dragons didn't see each other as kin. They were more fractured in their view of each other. Yet, ever since the Proto-Wings, the winglets have had a sense of respect for each other. Or at least, they did. Upon the icy peaks of Claw Mountain, the Ice Wings looked over all of Pareena, a commanding view. The Ice Wings lived on the remote peaks of Claw Mountain, only heading down the mountain to hunt, with some more intrepid dragons settling on the craggy lower peaks. The Icewing Kingdom was ruled not by a king, but a patriarch. Patriarch Coldwatch. He lived in a hollowed-out cave network at the peak of Claw Mountain, and frankly couldn't care less what was happening below. Before the Empire, the Ice Wings had a very, very loose idea of leadership. They, geographically, were widespread over the terrain of Claw Mountain. With their natural isolation, it meant whatever ruler calling themselves ruler. The Ice Wings on the lower peaks and valleys just didn't really care. And there lies another issue. Every so often, a new Ice Wing will just claim ownership over the winglet. And no one will care. The Ice Wings had no grand palace, no military, no anything, actually. With no fire available, the pre-Imperial Ice Wings couldn't build anything, smith, or use any mineral wealth. This left them with a very poor sense of advancement compared to, say, the other winglets. Even the Sea Wings could harvest sea life into tools, armor, or even trinkets. The Ice Wings had none of that. But there was one thing the Icewing territory had to offer, and that was an overabundance of animals and prey. The Icewing's borders lie in front of prime breeding grounds for mountain prey like polar bears, mountain wolves, elk, and deer. Now, the Icewings didn't really hunt much of this prey. They preferred to head down the northern slopes of Claw Mountain to hunt the ice seas to the north of the tundra scape. Here, Icewings hunt seals, walruses, and killer whales, the primary diet of their winglet. Hunting in the ice forests in the lower parts of the mountain ranges yielded extra prey, but it allowed the Icewings to farm very valuable items. Animal fur. Now, animal fur to Icewings doesn't do anything. They're biologically immune to the cold, crisp snow. They find it rather refreshing and comfortable, actually. But the other winglets in Pareena, they aren't so immune to winters. So the Icewings were able to greatly benefit from trade with other winglets, especially the Skywings. The Icewings traded what furs they could for awesome metalwork items made by Skywings, things like tools and weapons. But this was not on a winglet scale. So, individual Icewings would have to heckle for the best items. This ended up creating a few minor factions within the Icewings, like the so-called Ice Fangs. This gang would trade furs for the best gear and equipment they could possibly get their talons on, and then they used all that good equipment to essentially bully other Icewings to give up their hard-earned resources. Their close proximity to the Skywings did create a lot of tension, as the Skywings were undergoing a boom in their population, and any large population needs food. A lot of food. And you can't feed a growing population on just mountain goats and large birds. The Icewings had primary hunting grounds in the lower parts of Claw Mountain, so they also, to the reluctancy of the Skywings, traded their meat for other useful trinkets. The Skywings of past were nothing like their new Imperial counterparts. Instead of being roaming nomads, the Skywing Kingdom was civilized, advanced, and a significant power in Pareena. Skywing territory encompasses a lot of the lower parts of Claw Mountain, but the bulk of their overpopulation was nesting inside the Sky Palace. This egg-shaped palace is delicately balancing on a rock point, but is tethered to a cliff edge by a set of overly complicated cables that take years to produce in the furnaces below the palace. The Skywing Kingdom was known for its deep intolerance of hybrids. Any hybrids found in their territory were added to their vast collection of slave labor that the Skywings made to work in their furnaces, or sold them off to other winglets, or forced them to work in the few mines they had within their territory. Hybrids were treated very poorly, to the point it was common for Skywings to throw small rocks at hybrid populations as a sort of game. The Skywings weren't, though, without their faults. Their overpopulation led to a heavy need to feed this new growing population. At first, the trade deal with the Icewings was beneficial, but the Icewings got greedy. They demanded more in return from the Skywings, or the Skywings weren't getting their nice fluffy fur coats for the winters. This made the Skywings very, very resentful. They weren't really appreciative of the Icewings pushing them around. Tension was high. There was demand to take Icewing territory. With the limited food available, the Skywings would have no choice but to send in military troops. The current Skywing Queen, Queen Foxbat, preferred to trade with the Sandwings. She viewed their winglet as almost the same in culture and technology, But of course, the Sandwings had a lot more experience in smithing. The Skywing trade with the Sandwings was a lot more unorthodox to the Queen Foxbat compared to her dealings with the Icewings. The Tyrant of the Mojave paid top coin for slave hybrids, yet it was never revealed why the Tyrant wanted so many slave hybrids. But yet again, the Queen didn't trust the Tyrant at all. She could tell that he was power-hungry, per se. The Skywings, though, did have a standing uniformed army to enforce their borders, but they didn't have the size or equipment of the Tyrant's legions. The Sky Shields, as they were called by the Skywings, patrolled the border to the Icewings, having to keep a straight face as the Icewings mocked them from their own border. Little was known about the Rockwings then, and still today, little is known about them now. The Rockwings, for those who don't know, are similar to Mudwings in appearance, yet their scales are dark grey and they have large, jagged, bony growths coming from hard points on their body, which gives the appearance of rocks. This makes them a very hardy winglet, yet they're still a mystery. Their winglet was on the smaller size, and they lived in large stone domes in the lower valley. They didn't call themselves a kingdom, only having a single elder as their leader. They were mostly concerned with keeping to themselves and being peaceful, which made them an easy target for anyone stronger than them. Already the Rainwings and Mudwings were living their best together, calling themselves a collective. The Mudwings migrated from the marshlands into the open talons of the Rainwings, who provided the new Mudwings with survival tips, and the Mudwings brought smithing to the Rainwings. The rainforest was divided into two equal halves. The Rainwings would continue to live above the rainforest floor, and the Mudwings would live under the trees. The two winglets had no issues coexisting, and from their knowledge and understanding of the other kingdoms, they wished that all dragons would just be like them. The Rain Mud Collective was generous and willing to help any dragon who wandered into the rainforest, but this kinship and kind-heartedness shouldn't be mistaken. The Collective is more than capable of hosting a war. The Collective was governed by a clan system that the Mudwings have been using ever since the founding in the marshlands. The last Queen of the Rainwings, the Bloody Thorn of the Everrose, welcomed the Mudwings and willingly gave up her power to the clans. While the Mudwings had their 3 official clans, they created one just for Rainwings, which allowed them their own representation. But nothing was stopping a Rainwing from joining a Mudwing clan. But all clans answered to a single elder, something the Mudwings deeply valued. At this time, it was a hybrid Rainwing Mudwing named Melon, who led the collective. Melon was more brash and rough than others who came before him. He was willing to put up a fight, and unfortunately, he believed that the lives of the many outweigh the lives of the few. Melon had no tolerance for Skywings or Sandwings, in fact, any dragon who enslaved hybrids. He banished any Sandwings or Skywings from ever entering his rainforest. On a map, the Tail Islands seem expansive, but rather in reality, the Tail Islands are largely unexplored and uninhabited. There were some smaller communities of a few of the islands. They had been there for generations. These communities were forced to pay tribute to the Coral City, but to whom they owe this tithe? The Seawings had lost track. Frankly, the average Seawing at this time couldn't care less who was ruling them, even those in the Coral City. That's because the sea gave the Seawings everything they needed. They were not reliant on the royals to provide food or other items, like say the Skywings. Yet the Queen of the Sea Wings did have a small army, so unlike, say, the Ice Wings, for example, she could enforce her will, and the population, of course, had to play nice with their ruler. Pearl farming was commonplace among the islands, and the current Sea Wing Queen, Queen Tidalwave, was very adamant at building her collection of pearls. Yet, with anything else, Queen Tidalwave was really not interested in lifting a talon. Unlike her mother, defending one's territory and assets was too much hard work. Warfare isn't easy, it requires moving troops and feeding them and arming them, and it just takes up too much time. So simply put, the Sea Wing Queen preferred to stay under the waves and do nothing for nobody. She was completely self-centered. She also had a knack for manipulating young Sea Wing males to, let's say, do special favors for her. One of these many males could very well be Ocean's father. But what discussion about Pareena before the Empire would ever be so complete without mentioning the birthplace of the Sandwings? The barren wastes of the Mojave seemed quiet, the Sandwings of old occupying themselves with getting through the hot days. But deep in the heat and blistering sun of the desert lies a creature whose name has been lost to history, the Archdevil of Pareena. If evil walked among mortals, then it couldn't compare to the tyrant of the Mojave. A Sandwing with little care or respect for anyone other than himself. He literally backstabbed his own father. The tyrant controlled all aspect of his Mojave. He owned the farms, he owned the smiths, he owned every Sandwing in his border. And he demanded tribute for his generosity, for not killing everyone. Those dragons who had jobs worked strictly for the tyrant. But the Sandwings as a whole saw great achievements technologically, more than any other winglet could ever dream of. They had cities with walls, wells, marketplaces. They were the envy of the Skywings, the envy of the Rainwings. Or at least, that's what the tyrant said. Those close or in cahoot with the tyrant had a newfound sense of arrogance among them. The tyrant preached that the Sandwing was superior to all other winglets, and that they had a duty to show it. Yet, running the Mojave was mere child's play to the tyrant. No, he had a grander plan. Pareena was in much need of his leadership. Hybrids and other useless winglets were running amok, like Skywings. Oh, look at me, I can fly really high. I need some bullshit justification for my existence. Or Icewings, who wants to spend time in the cold? No thank you, they can all go. And then there's Sea Wings, ugh, who likes fish smell and wet slimy scales? No, Sea Wings can all die too. In fact, the tyrant had already started killing a small community of Sea Wings living within his territory. To him, they were, backwards dragons. These useless winglets were all suffocating Pareena's potential. They had to go. The dawn of Sandwing dominance was coming. The tyrant raised his legions, armies of loyal Sandwings, well-trained, well-equipped, and willing to die for their tyrant. led by some of the most deadly and effective military commanders in all of Pareena. Some of them a bit too good. His grand plan was to march on Pareena and crush anyone stupid enough not to bow to him, before installing himself as tyrant of Pareena, a legacy that will live on in his two sons, Nevada and Summer. While the tyrant had his plans for domination of Pareena, he didn't start the first blow of the war. No, that credit goes to the winglets on Claw Mountain. Already across Pareena, tension was high. Kings plotted war, queens buried their heads in the sand, and those who preached peace were now ready to march on the attack. Dragons whose names have been lost to time will find themselves in the middle of a species civil war. Yet it's their egos and dislike that will boil over into what would be known as the War of Unification. But that is where our story ends for now, on the brink of war. Hey everyone, post-credit Heatwave here. Thanks to everyone who has watched this first episode of the War of Unification lore series. Now, this lore series is actually a tester to gather some feedback before I tackle the things like the War of the Red Sands and the Hive Wars. Yet, I've covered a lot of the War of Unification already, so I'm merely fleshing out all the aspects and making it into an entertaining series. So, please comment below your feedback. I appreciate your assistance in this. This is your host Heatwave, signing off.